Sometimes the hardest job a man can do is forgive himself. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel Morrison's failing ranch, turning the earth to powder and the sky to brass. For 3 months, not a drop of rain had fallen on the Morrison spread, and Bull Morrison, a man who'd wrestled this land into submission for 40 years, found himself staring defeat in the face. His cattle were dying, his wells were running dry, and the banknotes were piling up like tumbleweeds against his front door. That's when the boy appeared. 8 years old, maybe 9, wearing boots 3 sizes too big and a cowboy hat that had seen better decades. He walked right up to Bull's porch with the confidence of a seasoned ranch hand and said something that stopped the old rancher cold. "Mr. Morrison, I know about the sick Herefords in the North Pasture, and I know why they're dying." Bull had told no one about those cattle. The veterinarian couldn't even figure out what was killing them. Yet here stood this strange child, speaking truths that should have been impossible for him to know. Who was this boy, and how did he know secrets that Bull Morrison had never shared with another living soul? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sam watched the boy dismount with the fluid grace of someone who'd been born in the saddle. The paint horse, a beautiful specimen with perfect conformation that must have cost more than Sam's truck, stood perfectly still as the kid dropped the reins. No fidgeting, no pawing, just patient waiting, like it understood something Sam didn't. "Name's Danny, sir," the boy said, removing a worn hat that had seen better decades. His hair was sandy brown, sun-bleached at the tips, and that scar above his left eyebrow caught the harsh light. "I heard in town you might be needing help." Sam almost laughed. Town was 15 miles away, and he sure as hell hadn't advertised his desperation. The only people who knew how bad things had gotten were his creditors and the vultures at First National. "You heard wrong, son. This ranch runs just fine with me." The lie tasted bitter. Last week, he'd had to sell off another 50 head just to make the interest payment. His foreman, Pete Kowalski, had quit 3 months back when Sam couldn't make payroll. The hired hands had followed like dominoes falling. Now it was just Sam, 2,300 acres of increasingly worthless scrubland and stubborn pride that wouldn't quit. Danny's grey-green eyes swept across the ranch with the calculating gaze of an experienced hand sizing up an operation. He took in the sagging fence posts, the empty corral where Sam used to break horses for extra income, the weathered barn where paint peeled like old scabs. When his gaze returned to Sam, there was something unsettling in it, not pity, but understanding. "That North Pasture's going to flood come September," Danny said quietly. "Creek's been shifting since the drought started. You can see it in how the cottonwoods are leaning." Sam's blood went cold. He'd noticed the trees himself just yesterday, worried about the same thing. But how could this kid see what it had taken Sam 40 years of experience to recognize? "Storm's coming too," Danny continued, squinting at the cloudless sky. "Day after tomorrow, maybe sooner. Big one. You'll want to get them cattle in the south section moved to higher ground." The weatherman on the radio had called for clear skies through the weekend. Sam studied the horizon where heat shimmers danced like ghosts, looking for any sign of approaching weather. Nothing. "Boy, where exactly did you say you were from?" "Didn't say, sir." Danny's voice carried that strange formality again, like he'd learned English from someone who'd learned it from books. "But I know cattle, and I know this land. That's what matters, isn't it?" Before Sam could answer, Danny walked over to the nearest fence post and ran his hand along the weathered wood. "This is good cedar, strong. Your grandfather chose well when he set these." Sam's mouth went dry. His grandfather had been dead for 30 years, and those posts. How could the boy know who had set them? The kid wasn't even old enough to have heard the stories from neighbors. Hell, most of the neighbors who might have remembered were long gone themselves. "How do you know about my grandfather?" Danny looked up, those unsettling eyes holding secrets a 12-year-old shouldn't possess. "This wood tells stories if you know how to listen. Cedar this good, cut and set proper. That takes a man who understands the land, respects it. He paused, his small hand still resting on the post. Your granddad. He planted that line of elms over by the creek too, didn't he? For your grandmother. Said every ranch needed something beautiful, not just useful. The world tilted. Sam gripped the fence rail to steady himself. Those elms had been his grandfather's wedding gift to his bride in 1891. The only person who'd known that story was Sam's father, and he'd been dead since 1922. Sam had never told another living soul. Who told you that? His voice came out rougher than intended. Danny stepped back, suddenly looking every inch the scared kid he probably was, underneath all that impossible knowledge. Nobody told me nothing, sir. I see things sometimes, notice things. He gestured toward the house, where paint peeled from the shutters and the front porch sagged on one corner. You've got good bones here. Just need someone to care for it proper. The bank notice crackled in Sam's pocket as he shifted his weight. 3 months behind on payments. The ranch that had survived the Depression, 2 wars, and countless droughts was finally dying, and here stood a strange boy with mysterious knowledge and a horse worth more than Sam's remaining cattle, offering to help. I can't pay you, Sam said bluntly. Can barely feed myself these days. Danny's smile was sad and knowing, like he understood more about loss than any child should. Didn't ask for money, sir, just asked for work. He paused, studying Sam's weathered face. Sometimes a man needs help whether he wants it or not, and sometimes the land calls to those who can hear it. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained stubbornly blue. Sam stared at the boy for a long moment, that impossible thunder still echoing in his ears. The sound faded into the everyday silence of a dying ranch. No cattle lowing, no hands calling to each other across the yard, just the whisper of wind through dry grass and the distant creak of the windmill that hadn't pumped water in 6 months. Storm's not coming for 2 days, Sam said finally, testing. Danny tilted his head, listening to something Sam couldn't hear. Tomorrow night, you'll smell it on the wind come evening. Against every grain of sense he possessed, Sam found himself believing the boy. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the way Danny spoke about the land like he'd been reading its moods for decades instead of years. You got somewhere to stay? I'll make do. The answer carried no complaint, just acceptance of whatever hospitality might or might not be offered. It reminded Sam uncomfortably of himself at that age, when pride was all a man had left, and asking for more than work felt like begging. Barn's got a clean stall, Sam heard himself saying. You can bed down there. Pump behind the house still works if you need water. Danny's face brightened with the first genuine smile Sam had seen from him. Much obliged, sir. Name's Sam. Sam Hartwell. He gestured toward the house. Been in my family since 1889. My grandfather homesteaded this section when it was still Indian territory. Good man, your grandfather, Danny said, and again that certainty in his voice made Sam's skin crawl. Built things to last. Sam walked toward the house, Danny following a respectful distance behind, leading the paint. The front porch groaned under Sam's weight, another reminder of all the repairs he couldn't afford. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon light, slanting through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since Margaret died 2 years ago. The house felt too big for one man, too quiet without Margaret's humming or the sound of Michael's boots on the kitchen linoleum. 12 years old Michael had been when he'd last walked through that door, same age as Danny. Sam pushed the thought away. You eat anything today? Sam asked, opening the icebox that held precious little, a half loaf of bread, some cheese, 3 eggs from the hens he hadn't yet been forced to sell. I'm fine, sir. That's not what I asked. Danny's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, betraying him. The boy's cheeks reddened. Been a while since breakfast. Sam pulled out the cheese and bread, began making sandwiches with the mechanical efficiency of a man who'd been feeding himself badly for too long. He poured 2 glasses of milk from the pitcher. Milk from Bessie, the last dairy cow, who was probably worth more as beef, but whom Sam couldn't bring himself to sell. She'd been Michael's favorite. They ate in the kitchen, while late afternoon light painted everything golden. Danny ate with careful politeness, small bites that spoke of good training and empty bellies. Sam found himself studying the boy's profile, looking for some rational explanation for the familiarity that tugged at his memory. "Your folks know where you are?" Sam asked. Danny's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Ain't got folks? Not anymore. Who's been taking care of you?" "Nobody needs to take care of me. I manage fine." The defensive edge in the boy's voice was achingly familiar. Sam had sounded the same way after his own father died, determined to prove he was man enough to handle whatever came. Pride and stubbornness ran in the Hartwell blood like a curse. After supper, Sam showed Danny to the barn. The paint followed docilely, and Sam noticed the boy never once had to tug on the lead rope or give commands. Horse and rider moved together like they'd been partners for years. "That's a fine animal," Sam said, running an appreciative eye over the paint's clean lines. "Where'd you come by him?" "He chose me," Danny said simply, leading the horse into an empty stall. "Sometimes that's how it works." Sam wanted to press for details, but something in the boy's tone suggested that was all the answer he'd get. Instead, he fetched a bucket of oats from the feed room, noting with grim satisfaction that the grain barrel was nearly empty, another expense he couldn't afford. "Storm comes like you say it will," Sam said, settling hay into the stall. "Maybe I'll have some work for you." "Nothing fancy, just moving cattle and checking fence." Danny's eyes lit up. "I'd be grateful for the chance to prove myself, sir." As Sam walked back to the house, he could hear Danny talking quietly to the paint, the words too soft to make out but the tone gentle and familiar. It reminded him of Michael, who'd talked to every animal on the ranch like they were family. Inside the house, Sam sat at his father's old desk and pulled out the stack of bills that seemed to grow larger every day. Bank notices, feed store accounts, veterinary bills from when he'd still been able to afford proper care for his stock. The numbers swam before his eyes, adding up to more than the ranch was worth, more than he could ever hope to pay. Tomorrow he'd have to make the call to Jim Morrison about selling the remaining cattle. Maybe enough to satisfy the bank, maybe not. But tonight, for the first time in months, the ranch didn't feel quite so empty. Sam woke before dawn to the sound of cattle lowing in distress. He bolted upright, heart hammering. He'd sold most of his herd weeks ago, keeping only the breeding stock he couldn't bear to part with. Maybe 40 heads scattered across the south pasture. But that sound carried the panic of animals in real trouble. He pulled on his boots and rushed outside, the pre-dawn air cool against his skin. What he saw stopped him cold. His remaining cattle were bunched together in the ranch yard, milling nervously but safe, every last one of them. And standing among them, moving with quiet authority, was Danny. The boy spotted Sam and walked over, his clothes already dusty from work. "Found them heading toward Devil's Canyon around midnight," Danny said, his voice steady despite what must have been hours of dangerous night riding. "Spooked by something, maybe a cat." Sam's mouth went dry. Devil's Canyon was a maze of arroyos and drop-offs 5 miles south. Cattle that wandered in there rarely came out. "You brought them all back? In the dark?" "Yes, sir. Took some doing, but they're safe now." Sam counted the animals automatically, his mind reeling. 38 head. Every one accounted for. Boy, those cattle were behind 2 gates and a mile of fence. How did they— "Gate by the old windmill was cut," Danny interrupted. "Clean cut, with wire cutters. Someone wanted your stock to run." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. He walked to his truck on unsteady legs, Danny following. They drove to the south pasture in tense silence, morning light creeping across the rangeland. At the gate, Sam knelt and examined the fence line. The cuts were exactly as Danny had described, deliberate, methodical. Someone had wanted his cattle scattered or dead. "Jim Morrison," Sam breathed. Morrison owned the spread to the east and had been pressuring Sam to sell for months. With Sam's cattle lost in Devil's Canyon, the bank would have foreclosed within days. and Morrison could have bought the land for a fraction of its worth. "You know who did this?" Danny asked. Sam nodded grimly. "Question is, how am I going to prove it?" "Don't reckon you need to prove anything just yet," Danny said. "But you might want to check your other fences. This wasn't the only cut." They spent the morning riding the property line. Danny led them unerringly to 3 more sabotage sites. Water lines cut, salt licks poisoned, fence posts loosened. Someone had been systematically destroying the ranch's infrastructure for weeks, maybe months. Sam had attributed the problems to age and poor maintenance, but seeing them all together, the pattern was unmistakable. "This has been going on for a while," Sam said, staring at a water trough that had been deliberately punctured. "Morrison's been planning this." "Man who'd do this won't stop with fences," Danny observed quietly. "Next time might be worse." The implication hung between them like a threat. Sam had heard stories from other ranchers about escalating pressure from land speculators, barns catching fire, cattle getting sick from contaminated feed, sometimes worse. They rode back to the house in heavy silence. Sam felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. He could call the sheriff, but Tom Bradley was Morrison's cousin and wouldn't move without proof that might not exist. He could sell to Morrison now, before things escalated further, but the thought of handing over his family's legacy to the man destroying it made his stomach turn. At the ranch yard, they found a black Cadillac parked beside the house. Sam's blood ran cold as he recognized Frank Hutchins, the bank president, waiting on the porch with a briefcase and 2 men in city suits. "Afternoon, Sam," Hutchins called out, his tone carrying false friendliness. "Hoped we could have a word about your account status." Sam dismounted slowly, his mind racing. The payment wasn't due for another 10 days. "What can I do for you, Frank?" Hutchins glanced at Danny, his expression dismissive. "Perhaps we should speak privately about your options." The larger of the 2 city men stepped forward, and Sam noticed the bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. Not bankers, then. Enforcers. "Any business you have with me can be said in front of the boy," Sam replied, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. Hutchins shrugged. "As you wish. I'm afraid the bank's position has evolved. We've received a very generous offer for your note. The new holders are requesting immediate payment in full, or they'll be forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings." Sam's world tilted. "You sold my loan?" "Business decision, Sam. Nothing personal." Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. Morrison couldn't wait for natural foreclosure, so he'd bought Sam's debt and accelerated the timeline. With the cattle sabotage as backup insurance, Sam would be ruined within days either way. "I need time to consider my options," Sam said carefully. The larger enforcer spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat menace of a man comfortable with violence. "Time's a luxury you don't have, old man. Pay up or pack up." Beside him, Sam felt Danny shift slightly, and something in the boy's posture changed. The childlike deference was gone, replaced by something harder and far more dangerous. "Might want to think real careful about your next words, mister," Danny said quietly. The threat was impossible to miss. The enforcer's eyes narrowed as he studied Danny, probably trying to decide if a 12-year-old boy was worth his attention. Sam's heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear of these men, though they were dangerous enough, but from the sudden, terrible certainty that Danny was about to do something that would make everything infinitely worse. "Easy, son," Sam said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward Danny's shoulder. But the boy had already stepped back, his face settling into an expression Sam had never seen before, cold, calculating, and far too old for his years. The transformation was so complete, it made Sam's skin crawl. "Danny," Sam said more firmly, "these men are just leaving." Hutchins cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden tension. "Now, Sam, there's no need for dramatics. We're simply here to discuss a business arrangement. Mr. Morrison has authorized me to make you a very reasonable offer for your remaining assets." "How reasonable?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer would be insulting. 50,000 for the land, buildings and remaining livestock. cash today. Sam's grandfather had paid more than that for the original homestead in 1889. With improvements and inflation, the ranch was worth at least 10 times that amount, even in its current condition. But with foreclosure looming and no other buyers in sight, Morrison knew Sam had no leverage. "That's robbery," Sam said. The enforcer smiled, and there was nothing pleasant about it. "Depends on your perspective, old man. Could be seen as generous, considering your circumstances." Sam felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Take the insulting offer and walk away with something, or fight and lose everything. Either way, the ranch would be gone, the legacy his grandfather built would be finished, and Morrison would win. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. Standing here in his ranch yard, surrounded by the buildings his family had raised with their own hands, Sam realized he couldn't just surrender. Not to Morrison, not to anyone. "I need 48 hours to consider your offer," Sam said. Hutchins shook his head. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Mr. Morrison needs an answer today." "Then tell Morrison he can go to hell." The words came out before Sam could stop them, carried by 40 years of stubborn pride and fresh anger over the sabotaged fences. He saw the enforcer's hand twitch toward his jacket and knew he'd made a serious mistake. "Sam," Hutchins said, his voice taking on a warning tone, "you're not thinking clearly. These men represent significant financial interests. Refusing their offer could have consequences." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sam glanced at Danny, who stood motionless beside him, and felt a crushing weight of responsibility. Whatever happened next, he dragged an innocent boy into it. "What kind of consequences?" Danny asked, his voice carrying that strange formality again. The enforcer stepped forward, clearly deciding the boy needed a lesson in respect, the kind that leave old men wishing they'd been more cooperative. Danny tilted his head, studying the man with unsettling intensity. "You ever been thrown by a horse, mister?" "What?" "Horse throws you hard enough. Sometimes things don't heal right. Bones set wrong. Muscles don't work like they should." Danny's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "Amazing how many ways a man can get hurt on a ranch, all sorts of accidents waiting to happen." The enforcer's face darkened. "You threatening me, kid?" "Just making conversation about ranch safety," Danny replied innocently. "City folks don't always understand how dangerous country living can be." Sam's blood turned to ice. The boy was deliberately provoking armed men, and Sam couldn't understand why. This was exactly the kind of escalation that would get them both killed. "That's enough," Sam said sharply. "Danny, go check on the cattle." But Danny didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer to the enforcer, and Sam noticed something impossible. The boy was no longer looking up at the man. Somehow, in the space of a few seconds, Danny seemed to have grown taller, his presence more commanding. "Your boss, Morrison," Danny said quietly. "He might want to reconsider his approach. Some things are more dangerous to take than they appear." Hutchins glanced nervously between Danny and his hired muscle, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics. "Perhaps we should go. Give Sam time to think things through properly." The enforcer looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Danny's steady gaze seemed to unnerve him. After a long moment, he stepped back. 48 hours, Hutchins said as they walked toward their car. "After that, the offer expires and other arrangements will be necessary." Sam watched them drive away, dust trailing behind the Cadillac like a threat. When they were gone, he turned to Danny, who had somehow shrunk back to normal 12-year-old proportions. "What the hell was that about?" Sam demanded. Danny looked up at him with those impossible gray-green eyes. "Sometimes bullies need to be reminded that they're not the only dangerous things in the world. Those men had guns." "I know." Danny's voice carried a sadness that seemed far too deep for a child. "But guns aren't the only way to hurt someone, and they're not always enough to protect what matters." Sam stared at Danny for a long moment, his mind grappling with what he'd just witnessed. The boy stood there in the settling dust, looking perfectly ordinary again. Scrawny shoulders, oversized clothes, the vulnerable posture of a child trying to appear brave. But Sam couldn't shake the memory of that other Danny, the one who'd faced down armed men without flinching. "We need to talk," Sam said finally. "Inside." They walked to the house in silence, Danny's boots scuffing against the worn wooden steps. In the kitchen, Sam poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. He offered the bottle to Danny out of habit, then caught himself and reached for the milk instead. "Sit down, son." Danny settled into the chair across from him, those grey-green eyes watchful. In the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, Sam could see the resemblance even more clearly, the stubborn set of the jaw, the way one eyebrow sat slightly higher than the other. Just like his father at that age, just like the faded photographs upstairs. "Those men will be back," Sam said. "And when they come, they won't be interested in conversation. I know. Morrison won't stop until he gets this place. He's got money, connections, and men willing to do whatever it takes." Sam took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down his throat. Smart thing would be to take his offer and walk away. "But you're not going to do that." It wasn't a question. Sam studied the boy's face, seeing certainty there that went beyond childhood intuition. "How do you know?" "Because this place is more than land to you. It's family. And a man doesn't walk away from family, no matter the cost." The words hit Sam like a punch to the chest. He thought of his grandfather, who'd carved this ranch out of nothing but stubborn determination and backbreaking work. His father, who'd expanded it through drought and depression. Michael, who'd never had the chance to inherit it. "Family's gone," Sam said quietly. "I'm the last one left." Danny's expression grew impossibly sad. "Sometimes family comes back to you in ways you don't expect." Something in the boy's tone made Sam's skin crawl with recognition. He'd heard those exact words before, spoken in his father's voice during the old man's final illness. But that was impossible. Danny couldn't have known his father, couldn't have heard those words. Unless... Sam pushed the thought away. Whatever game his mind was playing, whatever desperate hope was making him see connections that didn't exist, he couldn't afford the luxury of delusion. Not with armed men planning their return. "I should call the sheriff," Sam said, though even as he spoke the words he knew how futile they were. "Tom Bradley won't help you. He's Morrison's cousin, and Morrison's money built half the buildings in town." Sam's head snapped up. "How did you—" He stopped. He'd never mentioned the sheriff's name to Danny, never talked about Morrison's family connections, yet somehow the boy knew. "Doesn't matter how I know," Danny said softly. "What matters is what you're going to do about it." Sam stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch yard where his grandfather had first pitched a tent 63 years ago. The barn his father had built with his own hands, the corrals where Michael had learned to ride. Every board and nail represented sacrifice, sweat, and dreams of something lasting. "I can't fight them," Sam admitted. "Not alone. You're not alone." The quiet conviction in Danny's voice made Sam turn. The boy sat perfectly still in his chair, but there was something different about him now, an aura of patient strength that seemed to fill the kitchen like morning light. "You're 12 years old," Sam said. "Age isn't always what it appears to be." Before Sam could ask what that meant, Danny stood and moved to the window beside him. Together they looked out at the land that had defined 3 generations of Hartwells. "Your grandfather used to say this place would outlast him," Danny said quietly. "That it would outlast all of us, if we were worthy of it." Sam's breath caught. Those were his grandfather's exact words, spoken during family dinners decades ago, words Sam had never repeated to anyone, words that should have died with the old man. "Who are you?" Sam whispered. Danny looked up at him with eyes that held too much wisdom, too much sorrow. "I'm someone who understands what it means to lose everything, and I'm someone who knows that sometimes, if you're willing to fight hard enough, you can get a second chance." The boy's hand found Sam's weathered fingers, and the touch was warm, familiar, heartbreaking. "The question is," Danny said, "are you ready to stop running from your ghosts and start fighting for what matters?" Sam looked down at their joined hands and saw 40 years of regret, loneliness, and stubborn pride. He thought of Michael, buried in Korean soil, of Margaret, taken too young by cancer, of all the ways he'd failed the people he'd loved. But he also saw possibility, a chance to honor the legacy his family had built, a chance to prove that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. "Yes," Sam said, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. "I'm ready." The resolve in Sam's voice seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen, and for a moment he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with purpose. But the feeling was short-lived, as the weight of their situation settled back over him like a familiar burden. "Being ready and knowing how to fight are two different things," Sam said, releasing Danny's hand and moving back to the table. "Morrison's got resources I can't match. Money, men, influence. All I've got is a failing ranch and 48 hours. Danny remained by the window, his small frame silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. "Your grandfather didn't have much more when he started here. No money, no influence. Just determination and the knowledge of what needed doing. Times were different then." "Were they?" Danny turned from the window, and Sam caught that unsettling shift again, the boy's presence somehow larger, more substantial. "Men like Morrison have always existed. They've always used fear and force to take what others built. The only thing that's changed is the methods." Sam poured another whiskey, his mind churning. "Even if I could prove he sabotaged my fences, cut my water lines—" "Proof won't help you now," Danny interrupted. "By the time you gather evidence, Morrison will own your debt and your land. You need allies, and you need them tonight." The word allies struck Sam as strange coming from a 12-year-old. But then everything about Danny seemed impossible when examined too closely. What kind of allies? Other ranchers, men who felt Morrison's pressure but haven't broken yet. Danny moved to the kitchen table and spread his hands flat on the worn wood. Jake Brennan's lost cattle to accidents these past 3 months. Bill Carver's had water problems, fence troubles. They think they're fighting their own battles, but it's the same war. Sam stared at the boy. Brennan and Carver were neighbors, but their ranches were miles away across difficult terrain. Danny shouldn't have known their names, let alone their recent troubles. Yet he spoke with the certainty of someone who'd witnessed their struggles firsthand. "How do you know about Brennan and Carver?" Danny's eyes grew distant. "Word travels in ranching country. Animals cross property lines. People talk." It was a reasonable explanation, but something in the boy's tone suggested there was more to it. Sam had learned to recognize when Danny was offering surface truth while hiding deeper knowledge. "Even if you're right about Brennan and Carver," Sam said, "what can 3 failing ranchers do against Morrison's money and hired guns?" "More than one rancher can do alone." Danny's voice carried that formal cadence again, as if he were reciting something learned long ago. "Your grandfather knew that. It's why he helped start the Cattlemen's Association back in '95. Neighbors watching out for neighbors." Sam's blood chilled. The Cattlemen's Association had dissolved in the early 1920s, years before Sam was born. His grandfather had mentioned it occasionally, but never in Danny's presence. The boy couldn't possibly know about it unless— A sharp rap on the front door interrupted his thoughts. Both Sam and Danny froze, listening. The knock came again, more insistent. "Expecting someone?" Danny asked quietly. Sam shook his head and moved toward the front room, Danny close behind. Through the window, Sam saw a dusty pickup truck parked beside his own, and a familiar figure on the porch. "Jake Brennan," Sam said, surprised. He opened the door to find his neighbor holding his hat in weathered hands, his face grim with worry and exhaustion. Jake was 10 years younger than Sam, but looked older tonight, his shoulders bent under invisible weight. "Sam?" Jake nodded. "Sorry to bother you so late, but I needed to talk. It's about Morrison." Sam stepped aside to let him enter. "What about Morrison?" Jake's eyes flicked to Danny, then back to Sam. "Had some visitors today. Bankmen and hired muscle. They're calling in my note, demanding payment in full by week's end." He paused, his jaw working. "Same thing happened to Bill Carver this afternoon." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Morrison wasn't just targeting Sam. He was moving against multiple ranchers simultaneously, spreading his resources to prevent them from coordinating a defense. "How did you know to come here?" Sam asked. Jake looked confused. "Know what? I came because—" He stopped, his brow furrowing. "Funny thing, I was driving home from town, not planning to stop anywhere, but something told me to turn down your road, almost like I was being guided." Sam felt Danny's presence beside him like a warm current. The boy hadn't spoken since Jake arrived, but somehow Sam knew this visit wasn't coincidence. "We need to talk," Sam said, leading Jake toward the kitchen. "All three of us." As they settled around the table, Sam realized the rules of his world were changing in ways he couldn't yet understand. But for the first time since Morrison's threats began, he didn't feel entirely alone. The three men sat around Sam's kitchen table as darkness settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Jake accepted a cup of coffee with grateful hands, his weathered face etched with the same worry that had been eating at Sam for weeks. Danny remained quiet, but his presence seemed to anchor the conversation in ways Sam couldn't explain. "Morrison made you the same offer?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer. 50,000 for everything." Jake's laugh held no humor. "My grandfather would roll over in his grave." "That land's been in our family since 1891. "Same here," Sam said. 50,000 for 5 generations of work." Danny spoke for the first time since Jake arrived. "He's counting on you fighting separately. Easier to break 3 sticks one at a time than to break them bundled together." Jake studied the boy with curious eyes. "Smart kid. You're right, son. Morrison's playing us against each other, making us think we're the only ones in trouble." "What about the others?" Sam asked. "Henderson, the McCready brothers, old Pete Garrison." "Henderson sold out last month," Jake said grimly. "Got tired of his cattle wandering through mysterious fence breaks, ending up on Morrison's land. The McCready boys are holding on, but barely." "Pete," Jake shook his head. "Pete's got a week before the bank takes everything." Danny leaned forward. "That's 6 ranches in 4 months. Morrison's not just acquiring land, he's eliminating everyone who remembers how things used to be." Something in the boy's phrasing made Sam's skin crawl. How things used to be suggested knowledge that went deeper than a 12-year-old should possess. But Jake seemed to find nothing unusual in Danny's words. "The boy's got it right," Jake said. "Morrison wants more than our land. He wants the whole valley, and he wants no one left who'll remember when it belonged to families instead of corporations." Sam stood and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at shadows that might have been cattle or might have been memories. "So what do we do? Even together, we're outgunned and outfinanced." "Not necessarily," Danny said quietly. "Money and hired muscle work fine against scared, isolated men. But they're not as effective against neighbors who watch out for each other." Jake nodded slowly. "Like the old days, when rustlers hit one ranch, every man in the territory rode to help." "Exactly like that," Danny agreed. And again Sam heard that strange formality, as if the boy was speaking from personal experience rather than childhood imagination. "You're talking about range war," Sam said, turning back to face them. "Morrison's got the sheriff in his pocket, maybe the federal marshal too. We make a stand, we'll be the ones labeled as outlaws." "Maybe," Jake said. "But what's the alternative? Roll over and let him take everything our family's built?" Sam thought of his grandfather's words, spoken during the old man's final illness. "Sometimes you have to choose between what's legal and what's right. The law doesn't always protect what matters most." The memory hit him like a physical blow. Those were the exact words Danny had echoed earlier, words Sam had never repeated to anyone, words that should have been buried with his grandfather 30 years ago. "Sam?" Jake's voice seemed to come from a great distance. "You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." The phrase hung in the air while Sam stared at Danny, seeing his grandfather's stubborn jaw, his father's steady eyes, his own family's legacy reflected in a boy who couldn't possibly exist. But ghost or not, Danny was here, and somehow his presence was drawing the right people together at the right time. "I'm fine," Sam said finally. just thinking about what my grandfather would do." "What would he do?" Danny asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sam met the boy's grey-green eyes and saw decades of Hartwell determination staring back at him. He'd fight, not with guns if he could help it, but he wouldn't back down from men like Morrison. "Then that's what we do," Jake said, standing. "Fight smart, fight together, and fight for something bigger than ourselves." Danny nodded approvingly. "Tomorrow, you contact Bill Carver, the McCready brothers, anyone else who's felt Morrison's pressure. Tell them what you know, what you suspect. Build the alliance before Morrison realizes what you're doing." "What about you?" Sam asked. "You're talking like you won't be here." "I'll be where I need to be," Danny said mysteriously. "But this fight belongs to you and men like Jake. I'm just here to help you remember who you are." As Jake prepared to leave, shaking hands with both Sam and Danny, Sam felt something fundamental shifting in his chest. For the first time since Michael's death, he wasn't facing his problems alone. The boy, whatever Danny truly was, had given him back something he'd lost without realizing, the knowledge that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. The approach to war had begun, and Sam Hartwell was no longer running from his ghosts. The next morning brought news that shattered Sam's fragile hope like glass against stone. Jake arrived before dawn, his face grey with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. "They took Bill Carver's place in the night," Jake said, without preamble accepting the cup of coffee Sam offered with shaking hands. "Bank showed up with Morrison's men and a court order. Said Bill defaulted, but he swears he made his payments. They gave him 30 minutes to clear out." Sam felt the kitchen walls closing in around him. "Where's Bill now?" "Staying with his sister in town. Lost everything, cattle, equipment, even his grandfather's saddle." Jake's voice cracked. 43 years of his life, gone between sunset and sunrise. Danny stood by the stove, unusually quiet. The boy had been subdued since waking, his grey-green eyes holding shadows that seemed deeper than the dawn light could explain. When he finally spoke, his words carried a weight that made both men turn. "It's starting faster than expected. Morrison's not waiting for your alliance to form." "What do you mean?" Sam asked, though dread was already pooling in his stomach. Danny moved to the window, his small frame tense with something that might have been fear. "The McCready brothers. Someone should check on them." Jake was already reaching for his hat. "I'll ride over." "No." The authority in Danny's voice stopped Jake mid-motion. "It's too late. Morrison's men are already there." Sam stared at the boy, his mind reeling. "How could you possibly know that?" Before Danny could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the morning air. Not one truck, but several, their engines growing louder as they turned up the ranch road. Sam moved to the front window and felt his blood turn to ice water. 5 vehicles in total. Morrison's black Cadillac leading 3 pickup trucks filled with armed men, followed by a sheriff's department cruiser. The convoy moved with the deliberate precision of a military operation, kicking up clouds of dust that seemed to darken the morning sun. 48 hours, he said, Sam whispered. "It's only been 24. Danny appeared beside him, and Sam was shocked by the fear in the boy's eyes. Not the normal fear of a child facing danger, but something deeper, more desperate. "He knows," Danny said quietly. "Somehow Morrison found out about Jake's visit, about the alliance. He's moving before you can organize resistance." The vehicles pulled into the ranch yard with calculated intimidation. Morrison emerged from the Cadillac wearing an expensive suit that looked obscene against the backdrop of honest ranch dirt. Sheriff Tom Bradley stepped out of the cruiser, his face carefully neutral but his hand resting on his service weapon. The pickup trucks disgorged 8 men, 2 well-dressed and clean-shaven to be cowboys, their bulging jackets suggesting concealed firearms. "This is it," Sam said, his voice barely audible. "This is where I lose everything my family built." The weight of 3 generations settled on his shoulders like lead. His grandfather's desperate fight to establish the ranch, his father's struggle to expand it, his own failed attempts to modernize and survive, all of it ending in this moment with armed strangers in his yard and a court system bought and paid for. Sam. Danny's hand found his arm, and the touch carried impossible warmth. Remember what you told Jake last night? Your grandfather wouldn't back down. My grandfather never faced anything like this, didn't he? Danny's eyes held depths that seemed to span decades. He fought drought, blizzards, rustlers and men who wanted to drive him off this land because he wasn't the right kind of people. He fought when the odds were impossible, when everyone said he should quit. He fought because this place was worth fighting for. A sharp knock on the front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. Morrison's voice carried clearly through the wood. "Samuel Hartwell, this is official business. Open the door." Sam looked at Jake, seeing his own terror reflected in his neighbor's face. They were two aging ranchers against an army of money and violence, with only a mysterious boy as their ally. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to open that door and accept whatever terms Morrison offered. But as Sam reached for the door handle, he caught sight of the photograph on the mantel. 4 generations of Hartwell men standing in this same yard, their faces hard with the determination that had carved a life from unforgiving land. His grandfather, his father, himself and Michael, all connected by something stronger than blood, something worth dying for. "Whatever happens," Sam said to Danny, "whatever I learn about who you really are, thank you for reminding me who I'm supposed to be." The boy's smile was sad but proud. "Now you remember. Now you fight." Sam opened the door to face his ordeal and felt the ghosts of his family standing beside him. Morrison stood on Sam's porch like a conqueror surveying new territory, his polished shoes incongruous against the weathered boards that generations of Hartwells had worn smooth. Behind him, Sheriff Bradley shifted uncomfortably, his badge catching the morning light like a guilty conscience. "Mr. Hartwell," Morrison said, his voice carrying the false courtesy of a man who held all the cards, "I'm afraid circumstances have forced me to accelerate our timeline." Sam stepped onto the porch, Jake close behind him. Through the screen door, he could see Danny's silhouette, the boy standing perfectly still as if carved from shadow and memory. 48 hours, Sam said. That was the deal. Morrison's smile was cold as winter wind. Deals change when new information comes to light. He nodded toward Sheriff Bradley, who reluctantly pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Court order," Bradley said, his voice barely audible. "Immediate foreclosure proceedings based on loan covenant violations." Sam's hands trembled as he unfolded the papers, the legal language blurring before his eyes, but the meaning was clear enough. Morrison's bank was calling in the note immediately, claiming Sam had violated terms by attempting to organize resistance among neighboring ranchers. "You son of a bitch," Jake snarled, stepping forward. "You can't." One of Morrison's men moved like a striking snake, his hand emerging from his jacket with practiced speed. The barrel of A45 gleamed in the morning sun, pointed directly at Jake's chest. Now, Morrison said mildly. "Let's keep this civilized. Mr. Brennan, I believe you'll find similar paperwork waiting at your ranch. Something about missed payments and suspicious cattle deaths." Jake's face went white. "I haven't missed a payment in 15 years. Records can be unreliable," Morrison replied, "especially when ranchers become involved in conspiracies against legitimate business interests." The word conspiracies hit Sam like a physical blow. Somehow Morrison knew about last night's meeting, about their plans to unite the remaining ranchers. But how? No one had been present except... A terrible possibility crept into Sam's mind, cold and poisonous. He turned slightly, catching sight of Danny through the screen door. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock and fear. But doubt, once planted, grew like cancer. "You have 1 hour," Morrison continued, "to remove any personal effects. Everything else, livestock, equipment, structures, reverts to the bank as collateral recovery." "This is my home," Sam said, his voice breaking. 5 generations of my family are dead and buried. Morrison cut him off brutally. "The future belongs to progress, Mr. Hartwell, to vision and capital, not sentiment and stubbornness." Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sam, I'm sorry about this, but the law's the law. The law," Jake said bitterly, "bought and paid for." Morrison's man shifted the gun toward Jake with casual menace. "Careful, Brennan. Threatening legal proceedings could be construed as sedition." That's when Sam saw it, a second vehicle approaching fast down the ranch road, dust billowing behind it like a war banner. His heart leaped with desperate hope until the truck drew close enough to identify Pete Garrison's old Ford, driving far too fast for the rough terrain. Pete skidded to a halt beside Morrison's convoy and stumbled out, his face streaked with tears and ash. "They burned me out," he gasped, staggering toward the porch. "Morrison's men, they burned everything. Said I was 30 days late on payments, but I wasn't. I swear I wasn't." Morrison's expression didn't change, but Sam caught a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Mr. Garrison, you're trespassing on bank property now. I suggest you leave before you're arrested." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Morrison hadn't just accelerated the timeline. He'd orchestrated a simultaneous assault on every rancher who might have formed an alliance. While Sam had been planning resistance, Morrison had been eliminating the resistance entirely. "How?" Sam whispered, staring at Morrison's triumphant face. "How did you know?" Morrison's smile was razor-sharp. "Information, Mr. Hartwell, is the most valuable commodity in any business transaction. Knowing your enemy's plans before they do, that's worth more than all the cattle in Colorado." Sam felt his world crumbling like drought-cracked earth. Not just his ranch, not just his family's legacy, but his faith in Danny, in the mysterious boy who had appeared with impossible knowledge and timely guidance. The timing was too perfect, Morrison's intelligence too precise. Someone had betrayed them, and only 3 people had known about the alliance. Behind him, through the screen door, Danny made a small, wounded sound, like an animal caught in a trap it couldn't understand. 1 hour, Morrison repeated, checking his gold pocket watch. "After that, you'll be forcibly removed." As Morrison's convoy departed in a cloud of dust and diesel fumes, Sam remained frozen on his porch, watching everything his family had built disappear into the hands of strangers. The dark moment had arrived, and with it, the terrible suspicion that salvation itself might have been the instrument of his destruction. Sam stood motionless on his porch until the dust from Morrison's convoy settled like a shroud over the ranch yard. The silence that followed felt apocalyptic. Not just the absence of sound, but the death of hope itself. Behind him, he could hear Jake's ragged breathing and Pete's quiet sobbing, but these seemed to come from another world, one where Sam still believed in allies and second chances. When he finally turned around, Danny was standing in the doorway, his small frame backlit by the kitchen lamp. The boy's face was pale as winter moonlight, his gray-green eyes wide with what looked like terror and desperate confusion. "Sam," Danny began, his voice barely a whisper, "I know what you're thinking." "Do you?" The words came out harder than Sam intended, edged with 3 generations of accumulated pain. "Because what I'm thinking is that Morrison knew everything. Every word we spoke last night, every plan we made, and only 3 people were in that room." Jake looked between them, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. "Jesus, Sam, you can't seriously believe—" "The timing," Sam continued, his voice gaining strength from its own bitterness. "A mysterious boy appears out of nowhere with impossible knowledge, guides me toward exactly the kind of resistance that gives Morrison legal justification to destroy us all. It's too perfect, too convenient." Danny stepped forward, and Sam was shocked to see tears streaming down the boy's face. Real tears, carrying real anguish. But then, if Danny was truly what Sam now suspected, he'd be expert at manufacturing whatever emotion served his purpose. "I would never—" Danny's voice cracked like breaking glass. "Sam, you have to believe me. I came here to help, to save—" "To save what?" Sam's anger erupted like a long-dormant volcano. My ranch? My family's legacy? Because from where I stand, everything I care about is burning to ash, and you're the only one who walks away unscathed. The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Pete had stopped crying, staring at Danny with growing suspicion, while Jake backed away from the boy as if he'd suddenly revealed fangs. But something in Danny's reaction gave Sam pause. The boy wasn't defending himself with the smooth denials of a practiced liar. Instead, he looked shattered, completely, utterly broken, as if Sam's distrust had torn something fundamental inside him. "You want the truth?" Danny said, his young voice carrying impossible depths of pain. "The real truth about who I am and why I'm here?" "I think I can handle it," Sam replied, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Danny wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, a gesture so achingly familiar that Sam's breath caught in his throat. When the boy looked up again, his expression had changed, still wounded, but now carrying a resolve that seemed far older than his years. "I'm not Morrison's spy," Danny said quietly. "I'm not anyone's spy. I'm here because—" He paused, as if the words he needed to speak were almost too large for his small body to contain. "I'm here because I failed you once, and I couldn't bear to fail you again." The strange formality of Danny's speech, which Sam had noted from their first meeting, suddenly made terrible sense. Not the affectation of a clever child, but the speech patterns of someone from another time entirely. "Show me your scar," Sam said suddenly. Danny's hand moved instinctively to his left eyebrow, where a thin white line interrupted the dark hair. The same scar Sam remembered from faded photographs, the same mark that had distinguished every Hartwell man for 3 generations. "How did you get it?" Sam's voice was barely audible. "Fell from a horse when I was 7, Danny replied automatically. "Old Thunder," the Mustang Pa said, was too wild to ride. But I was stubborn, thought I knew better. The boy's eyes focused on something far beyond the present moment. Caught my head on a fence post. Ma was so angry she couldn't speak for an hour. Sam's legs gave out. He sank onto the porch steps, his mind reeling with an impossibility that somehow made perfect sense of everything. Danny's knowledge of cattle and weather, his understanding of ranch techniques from decades past, his intimate familiarity with family stories that had died with Sam's father. "That's impossible," Jake whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Danny knelt in front of Sam, his young face etched with ancient sorrow. "I know it sounds crazy. I know it challenges everything you believe about how the world works. But sometimes when a soul carries enough regret, enough unfinished business, the universe offers a second chance." The revelation crashed over Sam like a flash flood, washing away everything he thought he understood about life and death and the nature of love itself. The boy sitting before him wasn't a stranger or a spy or even a miracle. He was family. He was the ghost Sam had been carrying in his heart for 30 years, returned in impossible flesh to save what they had built together. Danny, his father, somehow, impossibly, had come home. The silence that followed Danny's revelation stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of impossible truth. Sam stared at the boy, at his father, trying to reconcile the child's face with memories of a man who had died when Eisenhower was still a general, and the world seemed younger, simpler. Jake broke the silence first, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "This is madness. People don't come back from the dead, Sam. They just don't." But even as Jake spoke the words, Sam could see doubt creeping into his neighbor's eyes. The same doubt that was transforming into something else entirely in Sam's chest. Not disbelief, but a desperate, growing hope that felt more dangerous than Morrison's guns. "Pa," Sam whispered, the word feeling strange and wonderful on his lips. He hadn't spoken it aloud in 30 years. Danny's face crumpled with relief and ancient pain. "I'm sorry, son. I'm so damn sorry I left you to carry this burden alone." Pete stumbled backward, his face white as fresh snow. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." But Sam was remembering things now, moments that had seemed odd but not impossible. Danny's knowledge of the hidden spring that only Sam's father had known about. His familiarity with the old barn's quirks, the way he'd automatically avoided the loose board on the porch steps, the way he handled tools with the unconscious expertise of someone who had used them for decades, not months. "The night you died," Sam said, his voice breaking, "you told me the ranch would be mine someday, that I had to promise to take care of it no matter what. I was 17, thought I knew everything." "You were stubborn as a mule and twice as proud," Danny replied, and the affection in his voice was unmistakably paternal. "Just like your grandfather, just like me. But Sam struggled with the impossibility of it all. "You're 12 years old. How is this possible?" Danny stood slowly, his small frame somehow carrying the weight of decades. "I don't pretend to understand all of it. Death isn't what we think it is, Sam. It's not an ending, just a different kind of existence. But some souls, when they carry enough regret, enough unfinished love, they can find their way back when the need is great enough." "The need," Jake repeated, his voice hollow. "You mean the ranch?" "I mean my son," Danny said firmly. "I died before I could teach him everything he needed to know, before I could prepare him for men like Morrison. I've been watching from whatever place the dead go to watch, and I've seen him struggling alone, carrying burdens no man should carry without family beside him." Sam felt tears streaming down his face, 30 years of accumulated grief pouring out like water from a broken dam. "I failed, Pa. I couldn't save it. Everything you and Grandpa built—" "Stop!" Danny's voice carried all the authority of the man Sam remembered. "You haven't failed anything. You fought droughts and recessions and a changing world that wanted to grind family ranches into dust. You survived the war, raised a son, kept this place alive for 40 years. Your grandfather would be proud." "Michael died in Korea," Sam said, the words scraping his throat raw. "Our line ends with me," Danny said quietly. "It doesn't, because I'm here now, and we're going to save this ranch together, all of it, the land, the legacy, the future." Jake found his voice again, though it shook with uncertainty. "Even if this is real, and I'm not saying it is, Morrison has the law on his side. He has money, politicians, armed men. What can we do against that?" Danny turned to face Jake, and Sam saw something new in the boy's expression. Not the lost confusion of a child, but the calculating determination of a man who had fought impossible odds before. "Morrison thinks he's won because he controls the present," Danny said. "But he doesn't understand the past. He doesn't know about the original land grants, the water rights your grandfather secured in 1887, the mineral claims that were filed but never properly transferred." Sam's breath caught. "The old documents in Grandpa's trunk, I thought they were worthless." "Not worthless, forgotten. But still legal, still binding. Morrison's lawyers are good, but they're focused on modern contracts and recent transactions. They haven't done their homework on territorial law." For the first time since Morrison's convoy had arrived, Sam felt something other than despair stirring in his chest. Not hope yet, that was still too fragile, but possibility. A sense that the game might not be over after all. "We need those documents," Sam said, standing straighter. "We need a lawyer who understands territorial law, and we need allies, real ones this time." Danny smiled, and in that expression Sam saw both the boy who had mysteriously appeared at his ranch and the father who had shaped his entire understanding of what it meant to be a man. "Now you're thinking like a Hartwell," Danny said. "Now we fight back." The old documents lay scattered across Sam's kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that might save everything or damn them all. Sam's hands trembled as he lifted each yellowed paper, squinting at faded ink that chronicled claims and rights his grandfather had secured when Colorado was still territory and the future seemed infinite. "Here," Danny said, his small finger pointing to a paragraph dense with legal language. "Water rights in perpetuity for all tributaries feeding Miller's Creek. Morrison's development plans assume he can divert that water, but according to this, he can't touch it." Jake leaned over Sam's shoulder, his earlier skepticism about Danny's impossible identity warring with desperate hope. Those look like territorial seals to me. But who's going to believe documents that old? Judge Harrison will, Sam said, studying a mineral claim dated 1889. He's old school, respects precedent. Problem is getting to him before Morrison's lawyers can muddy the waters. Pete, who had remained silent through their frantic document search, finally spoke up from his position by the window. "You're assuming we have time for lawyers and legal battles. Morrison gave you 1 hour, Sam. That was 40 minutes ago." As if summoned by Pete's words, the distant rumble of engines reached their ears. Through the kitchen window, they could see a new convoy approaching, more vehicles this time, including a truck that looked suspiciously like the kind used to haul livestock. "He's coming to take the cattle," Danny said, his young face hardening with resolve that belonged to a much older man. "Standard foreclosure procedure. Seize the assets before the owner can hide or sell them." Sam felt the familiar weight of his father's, .45 on his hip, the gun he'd strapped on after Morrison's first visit. 3 generations of Hartwells had worn that weapon, and for a moment he understood exactly why his grandfather had never gone anywhere without it. "Sam, no," Danny said, reading his thoughts with the uncanny perception that came from being both son and father. "Violence is what Morrison wants. Give him an excuse to bring in federal marshals, claim we're dangerous radicals threatening legitimate business. Then what?" Sam's voice cracked with frustration. "Stand here and watch while they steal everything?" "We make them work for it," Danny replied, moving toward the kitchen's back door with purposeful strides. "Every legal obstacle, every bureaucratic delay, every technicality we can muster. But first, we need to get these documents to town." Jake caught on immediately. "They'll have the main road blocked, maybe deputies posted to make sure you don't leave the property." "The old mining trail," Sam said, understanding Danny's plan, "cuts through the back pasture, comes out near the courthouse. But it's rough going, especially for—" He caught himself before saying, "a child," remembering who Danny really was. "I can handle it," Danny said firmly. "I know every rock and washout on that trail. Rode it 100 times when I was building this ranch." The sound of vehicles drew closer, and through the window they could see Morrison's expanded convoy spreading out like a military operation. Men with clipboards and badges, others with the hard faces of professional enforcers. "Take Ranger," Sam said, naming his most reliable horse. "He's sure-footed and won't spook under pressure. Find Judge Harrison. Show him the water rights documentation. Tell him Samuel Hartwell is exercising his legal right to challenge an improper foreclosure based on prior claims," Danny finished. "I know the language, son. I've fought this kind of battle before." The irony wasn't lost on Sam, seeking salvation from a father who appeared as a child, sending his elder into danger while he stayed behind to face Morrison's wrath. Everything about the situation violated the natural order, yet somehow it felt absolutely right. "What about us?" Pete asked, his voice tight with fear. "We buy Danny time," Sam said, checking his watch. "Delay, obstruct, demand documentation of every seizure. Make Morrison prove his authority for every cow, every piece of equipment." Danny was already moving toward the back door, the precious documents tucked inside his shirt. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at Sam, with eyes that held 60 years of accumulated love and regret. "Whatever happens," Danny said quietly, "remember that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible, especially then." Outside, Morrison's convoy was pulling into the ranch yard, dust clouds marking their arrival like smoke from an approaching wildfire. Sam heard car doors slamming, boots on gravel, voices raised in the officious tones of men backed by law and money. As Danny disappeared into the gathering dusk, riding hard toward town and their last desperate chance at salvation, Sam walked to his front door and stepped onto the porch where 5 generations of Hartwells had stood their ground. The final confrontation had begun. Morrison stepped out of the lead vehicle like a conquering general surveying claimed territory. He wore a charcoal suit, that had probably cost more than Sam made in a month, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the wind. Behind him emerged a parade of men in badges and suits, followed by rough-looking types who clearly weren't lawyers. "Sam Hartwell," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the false warmth of a snake oil salesman. "I hope you've come to your senses about our generous offer." Sam remained on the porch, his boots planted on boards his grandfather had cut and laid with his own hands. "Depends on what you mean by generous, Morrison. Stealing a man's life work at gunpoint doesn't strike me as particularly charitable." A thin man in wire spectacles emerged from behind Morrison, carrying a leather briefcase that bulged with official documents. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm Arthur Pennington, legal counsel for Morrison Development. We're here to execute a lawful seizure of assets as outlined in the foreclosure proceedings. I trust you'll cooperate with our inventory teams." "Inventory teams?" Jake stepped up beside Sam, his weathered face flushed with indignation. "You mean thieves with clipboards?" Morrison's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Now, Jake, there's no need for inflammatory language. This is a simple business matter. Sam defaulted on his obligations, and we're exercising our legal remedies." "Show me the court order," Sam said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. Every second Danny needed to reach town with those documents was a victory, no matter how small. Pennington opened his briefcase with theatrical precision, withdrawing a sheaf of papers thick enough to choke a horse. Standard foreclosure authorization, signed by Judge Crawford in Denver. Asset seizure permitted to satisfy outstanding debts. Sam took the papers but didn't look at them immediately. Instead, he studied Morrison's face, searching for some hint of the man's true intentions. "Funny thing about paperwork, Morrison. Sometimes what looks legal on the surface doesn't hold up under closer examination. What's that supposed to mean?" Morrison's composure cracked slightly, revealing the predator beneath the polished exterior. "Means I know about the territorial water rights," Sam said, taking a calculated gamble. "Means your lawyers might have missed a few important details about this land's legal status." The color drained from Pennington's face so fast it might have been comical under different circumstances. He leaned close to Morrison, whispering urgently in his employer's ear. Morrison's jaw tightened as he listened, his manicured hands clenching into fists. "Even if such documents existed," Morrison said carefully, "they would have expired decades ago. Territorial claims don't supersede modern contract law." "Don't they?" Sam allowed himself a small smile. "Guess we'll let a judge decide that. In the meantime, I'm formally challenging this seizure on grounds of disputed ownership." Pete, who had been quiet until now, suddenly found his voice. "You can't just steal a man's cattle without proper justification. Even in these times, there are laws." "Laws that we're following to the letter," Morrison snapped, his mask of civility finally slipping. He turned to gesture at the men spreading across the ranch yard. "Inventory everything. Cattle, equipment, buildings. If it's not nailed down, catalog it for removal." But Sam noticed something that gave him hope. The men weren't moving with the confidence of a legitimate operation. They kept glancing at Morrison for guidance, uncertain about their authority. These weren't federal marshals or county deputies. They were hired muscle dressed up to look official. "Interesting badges your boys are wearing," Sam observed. "What jurisdiction do private security guards have for livestock seizure?" Morrison's face flushed red. "We have full legal authority." "From who?" Jake pressed. "Show us the sheriff's department authorization. Show us the federal marshal's warrant. Show us anything that gives your goons the right to step foot on this property." The silence that followed was deafening. Pennington rifled through his briefcase with increasing desperation, sweat beading on his forehead despite the evening coolness. Morrison's jaw worked soundlessly, the trapped expression of a man whose bluff had been called. "You're stalling," Morrison finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "Whatever pathetic scheme you're cooking up, it won't work. I own this county's politicians, its judges, its law enforcement. You're fighting forces beyond your understanding." Sam felt the weight of his father's gun against his hip, felt the accumulated rage of 5 generations of Hartwells who had fought to build something lasting in an unforgiving land. But more than that, he felt Danny's presence, not physically, for the boy was miles away by now, but spiritually, the knowledge that he wasn't facing this battle alone. "Maybe," Sam said quietly. "But here's what you don't understand about men like us, Morrison. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet as the last light faded from the Colorado sky, and Sam realized that everything, the ranch, the legacy, the future itself, would be decided in the next few hours. The standoff stretched taut as a wire in the gathering darkness, Morrison's carefully orchestrated intimidation beginning to unravel in the face of Sam's steady defiance. The developers' hired men shifted uncomfortably, their pseudo-official authority evaporating under the growing realization that they had no legitimate power here. Morrison stepped closer to the porch, close enough that Sam could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sour scent of desperation. "You want to know what I understand, Hartwell? I understand that stubborn old fools like you are dinosaurs. This land would be better served by progress than by your pathetic attempts at preserving a dead way of life." "Dead?" Sam's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of accumulated fury. "You think this is dead?" He gestured at the ranch spread before them, the weathered barn that had sheltered 4 generations of animals, the corrals where countless horses had been broken and trained, the pastures that had fed family and community for over 60 years. "This land has more life in 1 acre than you've got in your entire soulless empire." Morrison's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Sentiment doesn't pay debts, old man. Poetry doesn't make mortgage payments. You're living in the past while the world moves forward without you." "The past?" Sam stepped down from the porch, his boots hitting the dirt with deliberate finality. "Let me tell you about the past, Morrison. My grandfather built this place when men settled disputes with handshakes and honor meant something. My father expanded it during the Depression when other ranches were failing left and right. I've kept it alive through drought, recession, war, and every other catastrophe this land could throw at me. That's not sentiment, that's legacy." "Legacy." Morrison spat the word like a curse. "Your legacy is failure, debt, a dying ranch that can't compete in the modern world." Something snapped inside Sam then, all the accumulated grief and frustration of the past months crystallizing into pure, cold rage. But instead of the explosion Morrison expected, Sam's voice became deadly calm. "You want to know about failure, Morrison? Failure is what you are. A man so empty inside that he has to destroy other people's lives to feel powerful. You could buy and sell 100 ranches, but you'll never understand what it means to build something with your own hands, to create instead of just consume." Morrison's face contorted with fury. "Enough philosophy. Boys, start loading the cattle. If these yokels want to obstruct a legal proceeding, we'll let the courts sort it out after. Touch one of my animals and see what happens." The voice came from behind Morrison's men, and everyone turned to see Jake emerging from the barn with a shotgun cradled in his arms. His weathered face was set in lines of granite determination. "Jake, don't," Sam warned, understanding that violence would give Morrison exactly the excuse he needed. But Pete appeared from behind the bunkhouse, also armed, his fear replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "Sorry, Sam, but some lines can't be crossed. These sons of bitches want our cattle. They can explain to Sheriff Martinez why they're stealing livestock without proper authority." Morrison's hired men reached for weapons of their own, the careful choreography of intimidation descending into the chaos of potential gunfire. Sam found himself at the center of a powder keg, one wrong move away from turning this into a range war that would destroy everything Danny was fighting to save. "Stand down!" Morrison barked at his men, but his voice cracked with the realization that his carefully planned operation was spiraling beyond his control. "We have legal authority." "Then show us," Sam roared, his patience finally exhausted. Show us one legitimate document that gives you the right to steal my cattle. Show us a real badge, a real warrant, anything that proves you're more than a gang of thieves in expensive suits." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Everyone turned toward the main road, where a convoy of vehicles was racing toward the ranch, but these weren't Morrison's reinforcements. Sam's heart leaped as he recognized the lead car, Sheriff Martinez's patrol vehicle, followed by what looked like half the town's pickup trucks. Morrison's face went white as he realized his window of opportunity was slamming shut. With witnesses arriving and his legal authority exposed as fraudulent, his only option was retreat or escalation into outright criminality. "This isn't over, Hartwell," Morrison snarled, backing toward his vehicles. "You can't fight progress forever. You can't fight me forever." Sam stepped forward, his hand resting on his father's gun but not drawing it. "Maybe not forever, Morrison, but I can fight you today, and tomorrow, and every day after that until one of us is dead and buried." The developer's eyes glittered with malevolent promise as he climbed into his car. "That can be arranged." The sound of Sheriff Martinez's patrol car doors slamming cut through the tension like a rifle shot. Martinez emerged with the measured stride of a lawman who dealt with his share of range disputes, his weathered face taking in the armed standoff with professional assessment. Behind him came Judge Harrison, silver-haired and ramrod straight despite his 73 years, followed by a parade of townspeople Sam recognized: Doc Peterson, the bank president Tom Wheeler, even old Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store. "Well now," Martinez drawled, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Looks like we got ourselves a situation here. Mr. Morrison, care to explain why you're conducting business on the Hartwell Ranch at gunpoint?" Morrison's composure cracked further as he realized the scope of opposition now arrayed against him. "Sheriff, we're executing a lawful foreclosure. These men are interfering with legal proceedings." "Legal proceedings require proper documentation," Judge Harrison interjected, his voice carrying 6 decades of judicial authority. "I understand young Danny Hartwell rode half to death getting to my chambers with some very interesting territorial water rights claims. Claims that predate your foreclosure by nearly 70 years. The lawyer Pennington went pale as old bones. "Your Honor, with respect, territorial claims from the 1880s can't possibly supersede modern contract." "Can't they?" Harrison's eyes glinted with the sharp intelligence that had made him legendary throughout Colorado's legal circles. "Son, I've been interpreting land law since before you were born. Territorial water rights with proper documentation trump debt instruments every day of the week and twice on Sunday." Sam felt something break loose in his chest, hope mixed with desperate relief. Danny had made it. The boy had ridden through darkness and rough country to deliver salvation in the form of moldering documents that carried more power than Morrison's threats and money. But victory demanded its price. "Even if the water rights complicate matters," Morrison said, his voice gaining desperate edge, "the debt remains. Hartwell owes money he can't pay. The bank has obligations." "The bank," Tom Wheeler interrupted, stepping forward with the careful precision of a man who chose his words like weapons, "is prepared to restructure Mr. Hartwell's debt based on the enhanced value of his property. Territorial water rights make this ranch worth considerably more than previously assessed." Sam stared at Wheeler in shock. The bank president had always been fair but hardly generous. This support felt like divine intervention until Sam understood the deeper calculation. A functioning ranch with valid water rights was worth far more to the local economy than whatever Morrison was paying in bribes and influence. "You can't be serious," Morrison snarled. "You're all making a mistake that will cost—" His words were cut off by the sound of a horse approaching at a hard gallop. Danny emerged from the darkness on Ranger, both horse and rider lathered with sweat from their desperate ride. The boy's clothes were torn from low branches, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but his eyes blazed with triumph. "Did it work?" Danny gasped, sliding from the saddle with movements that betrayed his bone-deep weariness. "It worked," Sam said, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't name. Pride in his father's determination, gratitude for salvation delivered by documents older than anyone present. And underneath it all, the growing realization that success would come at a cost that would tear his heart apart. Judge Harrison studied Danny with keen interest, his judicial instincts clearly detecting something unusual about the boy who delivered such precisely researched legal documentation. But before he could voice questions that might shatter the delicate fabric of their impossible situation, Morrison played his final, desperate card. "This is all very touching," Morrison said, his voice dripping venom. "But it doesn't change the fundamental problem. Hartwell still can't make his payments. The ranch is still failing. You're just postponing the inevitable." The words hit Sam like physical blows because they contained terrible truth. The water rights had saved them from immediate seizure, but the underlying debt remained. The drought continued. The cattle still needed feed they couldn't afford. They'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. "Maybe," Sam said quietly, understanding finally what victory would truly cost him. "But at least now I have options." He looked at Danny, at his father, and saw in those familiar grey-green eyes the same realization. Saving the ranch would require sacrifice beyond anything they'd imagined. Not the sacrifice of pride or money, but something infinitely more precious, the miraculous second chance they'd been given to know each other as they truly were. Morrison's convoy retreated into the night like wolves slinking away from a campfire, but their departure felt less like victory than reprieve. The real battle, the fight for the ranch's survival, was just beginning, and Sam was beginning to understand that some victories could only be purchased with loss. The convoy's taillights disappeared beyond the ridge, red dots swallowed by darkness like dying embers. Sam stood in the sudden quiet, acutely aware of how the night sounds had returned. Crickets resuming their chorus, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the familiar creak of the windmill turning in the evening breeze, normal sounds of a working ranch, yet nothing felt normal anymore. Sheriff Martinez holstered his weapon with deliberate care. Well, that was entertaining as a circus. "Sam, you mind explaining what just happened here?" Before Sam could answer, Judge Harrison stepped forward, his sharp eyes fixed on Danny with unmistakable curiosity. "Son, those water rights documents you brought me, where exactly did you find them? Some of that handwriting looked remarkably authentic for papers that should have crumbled to dust decades ago." Danny swayed slightly on his feet, exhaustion and adrenaline finally catching up with him. Sam moved instinctively to steady the boy, his hand finding a shoulder that felt too thin, too fragile for someone who'd just saved everything they'd built. "Found them in the old trunk," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden compartment Sam's grandfather built into the bottom." The near slip hung in the air like smoke. Sam felt the weight of watching eyes, Martinez with his lawman's instincts, Harrison with 6 decades of reading people's secrets, the townspeople who'd risked Morrison's wrath to stand with him, all of them sensing something inexplicable about this scrawny boy who possessed impossible knowledge and spoke with an old man's wisdom. "Remarkable," Harrison murmured. "Your grandfather was quite the record-keeper, Sam. These documents show a level of legal sophistication that—" "Judge," Sam interrupted, understanding that some questions couldn't be answered without destroying everything. "I appreciate everything you've done tonight, but it's been a long day and the boy's about ready to drop." Harrison studied Sam's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Of course, though I suspect this isn't the last conversation we'll have about those water rights. Legal complications like this tend to require thorough documentation." The crowd began to disperse gradually, townspeople offering handshakes and words of support before climbing into their trucks. Tom Wheeler approached last, his banker's precision evident even in the darkness. "Sam, those water rights change everything about your loan status," Wheeler said. "But Morrison was right about one thing. The underlying debt remains substantial. We'll need to discuss restructuring terms. payment schedules, collateral arrangements. "I understand," Sam said, though the words felt hollow. He understood far more than Wheeler realized. The ranch might be saved, but saving it would require resources they didn't have, which meant selling cattle they couldn't spare, mortgaging land that had been free and clear for 3 generations, accepting help that would fundamentally change what this place meant. After the last vehicle disappeared down the main road, Sam found himself alone with Danny beside the corral fence. Ranger stood nearby, still breathing hard from their desperate ride, steam rising from his sweat-soaked hide in the cool night air. "You saved it," Sam said quietly. "Everything we've built here. You saved it all." Danny's laugh was bitter beyond his apparent years. "Did I? Morrison's right about the money, Sam. The water rights give us legal protection, but they don't pay for feed or medicine or the 1,000 other things a ranch needs to survive." Sam turned to face the boy, his father, seeing in those familiar features the weight of understanding that had always existed between them. "We'll find a way. Sell some land maybe, take on partners. Change everything that makes this place what it is," Danny finished. "Turn it into something profitable instead of something meaningful. Is that victory?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Sam looked out over the ranch, his grandfather's dream made manifest, his father's life's work, his own legacy to a son who would never return from Korea, everything he'd fought to preserve now safe from Morrison's predatory ambitions, but at what cost? "I don't know," Sam admitted, "but I know it's better than letting vultures like Morrison tear it apart for profit. At least this way we control what changes. At least the land stays in family hands." Danny nodded slowly, but Sam caught something else in the boy's expression, a sadness that seemed to encompass more than just tonight's victory, as if he understood sacrifices that hadn't yet been demanded, costs that hadn't yet come due. "We should tend to Ranger," Danny said finally. "Horse like that deserves proper care after what he gave us tonight." They worked together in comfortable silence, rubbing down the exhausted paint horse, checking for injuries, ensuring he had fresh water and feed. Simple ranch work that had been repeated countless times across 4 generations. Yet tonight it felt like ceremony, a ritual acknowledgement of what had been preserved and what had been lost. When they finally headed toward the house, Sam realized that saving the ranch had been the easy part. Learning to live with the cost of salvation, that would be the real test of everything they'd fought to preserve. The morning sun painted the ranch in shades of gold and amber, transforming the familiar landscape into something that looked both eternal and fragile. Sam stood on the front porch with his coffee, watching Danny work with the horses in the corral, and marveled at how different everything felt despite looking exactly the same. 3 weeks had passed since Morrison's defeat, 3 weeks of telephone calls with lawyers and bankers, of paperwork that turned their salvation into legal reality. The water rights had indeed changed everything, not just their debt status, but their standing in the community. Neighbors who'd kept polite distance during the worst of their troubles now stopped by with offers of assistance, invitations to cooperative ventures, respectful acknowledgement of the Hartwell name. But the real change was subtler, deeper, visible only to someone who knew what to look for. Sam saw it in the way Danny moved through the ranch work, still possessed of that impossible knowledge, but carrying himself differently now. Less like someone desperately trying to prove his worth, more like someone who belonged exactly where he was. "Morning, Sam." Jake emerged from the barn, his weathered face creased with something that might have been contentment. "That boy of yours has been at it since dawn. Got the sick heifer separated and started her on the medicine Doc Peterson recommended." "That boy of yours." The phrase still sent a complicated thrill through Sam's chest. In the weeks since Morrison's attempted seizure, something had shifted in how the ranch hands spoke about Danny. No longer was he the mysterious kid Sam had taken in. He'd become family in the eyes of everyone who worked the land. "He's got good instincts," Sam said, which was perhaps the greatest understatement of his life. "Better than good." Jake's voice carried a note of wonder. Yesterday he predicted that storm 3 hours before the clouds even showed up on the horizon. Today he's talking about rotating the cattle to the north pasture because the grass there's going to be stronger next month. Don't know how he knows these things, but he's been right about everything so far. Sam nodded, watching Danny gentle a skittish mare with movements that spoke of decades of experience compressed into a 12-year-old frame. The miracle of their situation hadn't diminished with familiarity. If anything, it had become more profound as Sam learned to see his father not as the elderly man who'd raised him, but as this bright, determined child who carried wisdom like a secret treasure. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention to the main road. Tom Wheeler's car kicked up a small dust cloud as it wound toward the ranch house, and Sam felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with banker visits, even friendly ones. Wheeler emerged from his car with the careful movements of a man who spent too many hours behind a desk, his pressed shirt and clean boots marking him as definitively separate from the working ranch around him. But his expression was warmer than Sam had ever seen it, carrying news that transformed his entire bearing. "Sam, I hope you've got time to talk," Wheeler called out, "because I've got a proposition that might interest you." They settled on the porch while Danny continued working with the horses, close enough to listen but maintaining the pretense of being absorbed in his tasks. Sam had learned to read the subtle signs, the way Danny's movements became more deliberate when he was paying attention to conversations, the slight tilt of his head that indicated careful listening. "3 different ranching operations have approached the bank about partnering with you," Wheeler began, his banker's precision evident even in casual conversation. "Word's gotten out about those water rights, and suddenly everyone wants to discuss cooperative arrangements." Sam set down his coffee cup with careful control. "What kind of arrangements?" "Cattle sharing agreements, grazing partnerships. One outfit from up north is talking about a breeding program using your land and their stock." Wheeler's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man delivering good news. "Point is, Sam, you've got options now. Real options that could solve your cash flow problems without compromising the ranch's integrity." The words should have brought relief, but Sam found himself looking toward Danny, seeing in the boy's suddenly rigid posture the same understanding that was crystallizing in his own mind. Success was going to mean change, fundamental, irreversible change that would transform the ranch from a family operation into something larger and more complex. "These partnerships," Sam said slowly, "they'd want to bring their own people, their own methods? Some of them, yes. But you'd maintain primary ownership, primary control. Think of it as expanding rather than surrendering." Danny had stopped working entirely now, his hands resting on the fence rail as he stared out toward the mountains. In his profile, Sam could see the weight of decisions that reached far beyond immediate financial concerns, choices that would determine not just the ranch's survival, but its essential character. "I appreciate the offer, Tom," Sam said finally, "but I need time to think it through. Decisions like this shouldn't be rushed." Wheeler nodded, understanding that some changes required more than financial calculation. As his car disappeared back down the main road, Sam realized he was no longer the same man who'd first dismissed a scrawny boy asking for work. The ranch had been saved, but saving it had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Sam walked over to the corral where Danny stood motionless, his small hands gripping the fence rail with white-knuckled intensity. The morning light caught the familiar scar above the boy's left eyebrow, and Sam felt the now familiar ache of recognition mixed with impossible gratitude. "You heard all that?" Sam said, settling against the fence beside his father. Every word. Danny's voice carried the weight of decisions that stretched across decades. "They want to change everything, don't they? Turn this into some kind of business operation instead of a family ranch." Sam studied the land that had defined 4 generations of Hartwells, the pastures where his grandfather had built their first herd, the creek where his father had taught him to fish, the barn where he'd learned that honest work was its own reward. Maybe change isn't always wrong. Maybe sometimes it's the only way to preserve what really matters. Danny turned to face him, those grey-green eyes holding depths that no 12-year-old should possess. "And what really matters, Sam?" The question hung between them like a bridge across impossible years. Sam found himself thinking of his son Michael, dead on a Korean hillside, and the bitter irony that losing one family member had brought him another. He thought of the dreams he'd carried and abandoned, the regrets that had shaped him, the loneliness that had nearly destroyed him before a scrawny boy rode up asking for work. "The land matters," Sam said slowly. "But not just the land itself, what we do with it, how we treat it, the kind of life we build on it." He paused, watching a hawk circle overhead. "But mostly it's about family, about having someone to pass it all on to." Danny's smile was sad and knowing. "Even if that someone isn't what you expected?" Sam reached out and ruffled the boy's hair, marveling at how natural the gesture had become, especially then. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the cattle graze in the distance. The drought that had nearly broken them was finally ending. Clouds had been building more frequently, and yesterday's rain had been the heaviest they'd seen in months. The grass was beginning to recover, taking on the green tinge that promised better days ahead. "I've been thinking," Danny said eventually, his voice carefully neutral, "about those partnership offers Wheeler mentioned, and the Morrison Ranch. It's going to be sold at auction next month." Danny's words came faster now, animated by an idea that seemed to surprise even him. "Sheriff Martinez mentioned it yesterday. Morrison overextended himself trying to buy us out, and his creditors are circling." Sam felt a grim satisfaction at the news, followed immediately by understanding. "You think we should make an offer?" "Not us. One of those partnerships Wheeler mentioned. Use their capital to buy Morrison's land, then manage it the right way, restore what Morrison destroyed with his poor practices." Danny's eyes gleamed with possibilities. "It would give us the size we need to be profitable while letting us control how the land gets treated." The audacity of it took Sam's breath away. 6 months ago, he'd been facing bankruptcy. Now his 12-year-old father was proposing they acquire their enemy's ranch through careful alliance building. That's quite a plan. "It's risky," Danny admitted, "but so is doing nothing. Wheeler's right about one thing: we need to expand, or we'll just face the same problems again in a few years." Sam studied the boy's face, seeing in it the same determination that had carried their family through 4 generations of challenges. This was why his father had come back, he realized suddenly, not just to save the ranch from immediate destruction, but to ensure it could thrive for generations to come. "All right," Sam said, decision crystallizing with surprising clarity. "We'll talk to Wheeler about the partnerships. But we do this our way, with our values. The land comes first, always." Danny's grin was pure 12-year-old joy. "Want to go look at those water rights documents again? I think there might be more surprises hidden in that trunk." As they walked toward the house together, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced since before Korea stole his son. Hope for the future. The ranch would survive and flourish, passed down to new generations who would understand both its history and its possibilities. He glanced at Danny, seeing his father as he'd never known him but always needed him to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new changes, but today, walking across land that had shaped both their lives, Sam Hartwell finally understood that some miracles were meant to be lived rather than questioned. The afternoon stretched before them, full of ordinary work made extraordinary by the gift of doing it together, and for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough.